Welcome to Snooze and Stories. I'm your host, and I'm here to read you a bedtime story. In the serene hills of Tamil Nadu, India, nestled in the charming hill station of Coonoor, a man lives alone, quietly listening to the life that unfolds above him. He hears laughter, the whispered worries, and the everyday rhythms of a family. Yet, he remains a distant observer, never truly engaging. This story invites you to explore the quiet moments of existence, where witnessing life can feel like being on the outside, looking in. Have you ever felt like a silent observer in someone else's life? Wondering what it truly means to connect with those around you. Tonight's story, Witnessing Through the Floorboards, gently explores the invisible lines between seeing and feeling, presence and absence. As you settle in, allow the sounds of this tranquil world to wash over you, guiding you through the delicate spaces where connection and distance intertwine. The man on the ground floor always heard before he saw. Lived a bachelor's life punctuated by silence and the occasional murmur of distant laughter. In his 40s, he resided in a half-empty room nestled within the misty hills of Coonoor. The air, thick with the scent of tea plantations, wrapped around him like an old familiar shawl. Very comforting, yet suffocating. His modest space was decorated with remnants of a life untouched by chaos. Books stacked haphazardly, a clock that ticked in patient defiance of time, and a fan that hummed lazily. Its dull rhythm, a metronome to his uneventful existence. Life unfolded in fragments from the ceiling above, where a family lived, noisy and unaware of their accidental audience below. Each day, upon returning from work, he would drop his bag by the door, flick on the light, and let the weariness settle into his bones like an unwelcome guest. On this particular morning, as he stepped inside, he heard it. The soft grind of spices filling the air from above. The mother's hands moved with purpose, creating a steady rhythm that felt almost sacred, like a heartbeat in the silence of his solitude. Cumin, coriander, turmeric, each crushed with a care that only years of practice could bring. The air thickened with fragrance, and he inhaled deeply, the warmth rising not from his own stove, but hers. In that moment, he imagined the children upstairs, their voices drifting through the floorboards like echoes of a life that was both foreign yet achingly familiar. As he unpacked his lunch, preparing for yet another solitary dinner, the sounds above shifted. The laughter of the children turned into playful bickering, sharp and quick. As siblings jostled for attention, "That's mine," one would cry, followed by another's defiant retort. He chuckled softly, remembering his own childhood squabbles. Sweet, bitter. He chuckled softly, remembering his own childhood squabbles. Sweet, bitter, and tinged with the nostalgia of shared memories. Yet, their joy soon twisted into frustration as a loud argument erupted. Voices raised in a flurry of accusations and shouts that felt like thunderclaps in the night. But not all sounds were harmonious. On certain nights, the man would hear sharper words slicing through the air. The mother's voice would rise first, frustration breaking the quiet like a fragile glass. The father's voice followed, deep and slow, attempting to calm but failing. And the argument would spiral into a silence so heavy it pressed against his chest, punctured only by the slow creak of the wooden floor as someone walked away. He sat there, staring at the cracks in his ceiling, wondering what fault lines lay in their lives above, feeling a strange mix of empathy and disconnect. Then came the evening of the birthday celebration, a night filled with laughter and warmth that drifted down from the floors above, breaking the silence of his solitary home. He returned, weariness pulling at him, when the joyous sounds reached his ears, voices rising in unison to celebrate the overseas daughter's birthday through the soft glow of a FaceTime screen. Her laughter echoed through the walls, a vibrant thread connecting their lives across the miles. He could almost see the scene above, a colorful cake lit with candles, siblings buzzing with excitement as they sang. The mother's voice trembled with affection, and the father's steady tone filled in the spaces, creating a familiar rhythm. For a moment, he felt part of their joy, even as he remained tethered to his quiet existence. But as the celebrations carried on, the sounds began to fade into the night, leaving him alone once more, wrapped in the stillness of his thoughts. The family's sound blurred into a distant hum, like part of the house itself, half heard, and ever present. Background noise he barely registered, yet couldn't escape. The next morning, he awoke to a gentle knocking at his door, a sound that broke the monotony of his routine. Rubbing the sleep from his eyes, he shuffled to the entrance, still caught in the remnants of his dreams. When he opened the door, a child of 9 stood there, bright-eyed and holding a steaming dish. "Mama sent this for you," they said, the innocence in their voice cutting through the morning chill. "Thank you," he replied, accepting the dish. Its warmth, a small comfort against the cool. He sensed a connection forming, a simple act of kindness bridging the gap between their lives. As he stepped back into his room, the plate heavy in his hands, he felt the familiar hum of the fan. But with the dish came a spark of warmth, a reminder that life continued to pulse above him, intertwining their stories in unexpected ways. In the cool embrace of the hills, he often heard the father pacing above him, footsteps heavy and deliberate, like the weight of unspoken worries. Sometimes the mother's voice would follow, soothing, reassuring. Though he could not hear their words, the tones were enough, a reminder that even in worry there was togetherness. He busied himself organizing his mismatched shoes or scribbling notes for work. Sundays brought a different kind of sound. Laughter rang out, mixing with the rustling of newspaper and the clatter of pans. He imagined them sitting around the table, the mother teasing the children, the father grunting in mock protest, and the grandmother's soft, old voice murmuring in the background. A calming presence woven into the fabric of their lives. These mornings were like sunlight creeping through the curtains, brief, warm moments that filled him with a bittersweet ache for connection. Even as he remained entrenched in his solitary routines, as he witnessed their lives unfold, a blend of love and discord, he realized he was more than just an observer. In their small moments of connection and conflict, he found fragments of his own heart, a mirror reflecting the loneliness he had carried like a worn-out backpack. Gunor, with its misty hills and tea plantations, became the backdrop, not just for his isolation, but also for the unexpected kinship he felt with the family above. The night chaos arrived was like any other. The man sitting in his dimly lit room, tracing the familiar creaks of the house above. Yet, something felt different. The usual lull of laughter and the muffled conversation replaced by a rising tension that made the walls seem thinner than they were. Suddenly, anxious tones, worried phone calls, and hurried footsteps on the stairs. Down, not up. The door rattled, and before he could comprehend the moment, she was there, the mother, standing breathless, her face pale with worry. In her hand, she held a small silver key, glinting like a star caught in her grasp. "We're taking Amma to the hospital," she said, her words tumbling out in a rush, eyes darting back up the staircase as if she could summon her family with sheer will. "Could you?" She thrust the key into his hand, trembling. "We might be back late, just in case." Before he could respond, she was already halfway back up the stairs. Her footsteps, a blur of urgency. He stood there, clutching the key, still warm from her hand. He barely had a moment to process when he called out, "Do you need help?" "No." "No time for ambulance," she shot back, her voice strained with urgency. "We're just putting her in the car." He watched as they hurriedly laid the grandmother onto a stretcher, their movements frantic yet choreographed, a dance of desperation that pulled at the edges of his heart. And then they were gone. The sounds of tires screeching away, leaving only echoes of fear and the weight of his helplessness behind. He stood by the door, staring at the key, unsure what to do. The hospital was too far for him to hear anything now. And yet, he felt as if the air itself was heavy with anticipation, as though something had shifted in the universe, but he was the only one left behind to witness it. He didn't move, didn't sit, just stood there in the quiet. Hours passed before his phone rang, its sudden sound cutting through the thick silence. The name on the screen was one he barely recognized, but he knew who it was. The father's voice came through, steady but tired. "We're coming home," was all he said. When the family returned home, he finally mustered the courage to go upstairs. He knocked softly on their door and stepped into the dimly lit room. A few relatives were there, their faces lined with weariness. The atmosphere felt heavy. The house, not as lively as he had imagined from his spot below. "I just came to return the key," he said, holding it out, the small object feeling weighty in his palm. "I'm so sorry for your loss. If you need anything else..." His voice trailed off, the offer hanging in the air, unfulfilled. They acknowledged him with quiet nods, a few murmurs of thanks that barely broke the stillness. The body lay in another room, and he could sense the family's reluctance to confront the reality of their loss. They seemed trapped in a moment that refused to unhold. The silence, punctuated only by the distant ticking of a clock. Not wanting to intrude further, he excused himself and retreated back downstairs. The silence followed him, pressing against his chest. A stark contrast to the muted commotion above. He returned to his half-empty space, where the familiar hum of the fan was now a reminder of his own solitude. The funeral followed in a blur. Neighbors, relatives, friends, people he had never seen before came and went. Their footsteps on the stairs, a constant reminder of the world moving on. Each arrival felt like a ripple in the stillness, a sign of life continuing beyond the grief that enveloped the family. He stayed in his room, observing the fleeting shadows of their sorrow, acutely aware of his place as a mere witness to their profound loss. As he descended back to his solitary existence, the stillness followed him, filling the spaces between his thoughts. The days blurred one into the other, but the silence, so complete, so suffocating, remained. One evening, long after the house had fallen silent once more, the man heard something different. The father's voice, low and steady, drifted through the floorboards. Faint, but unmistakable. It was a rhythm he hadn't quite caught before, a murmur of something deeply personal. Though the words remained indistinct, they seemed to hang in the air, a fragile thread woven through the silence. He leaned into the stillness of his room, the hum of the fan barely registering against the weight of the moment. For the first time, he wasn't merely a passive listener. Straining to hear, he recognized that the father was reading a religious text, words meant to offer comfort during sorrow. This ritual, one he had witnessed many times, took on new significance in the context of overwhelming loss. The father's voice trembled, each syllable heavy with unprocessed pain. The man felt the weight of the father's grief seep through the floorboards, a palpable force that echoed the ache of his own isolation. The father's quiet whimpers broke the cadence, resonating deeply within him. He realized that this was not just an act of fate. It was a desperate grasp for solace amid despair. The familiar patterns of prayer, once abstract, now became a painful reflection of the father's struggle. In that moment, he could almost feel the man's heart breaking above him. As the father cried silently, the sound slipped through the stillness of the night, like a whispered secret. In that heavy darkness, he sat paralyzed by the weight of the moment, no longer merely an observer, but a reluctant witness to the raw, unfiltered reality of grief that seeped through the ceiling. The father's quiet sobs transformed into a haunting melody in the night air, pressing down on him and reminding him that grief was not an abstract concept. It was a living, breathing entity that wrapped around him like a shroud. The air thickened with unspoken losses, lingering like shadows, leaving him grappling with the profound ache of disconnection. For the first time, he understood that grief was not something to watch from a distance. It seeped through the cracks of their lives, through the stillness of the night, inviting him into a world where life was lived, loss was mourned, and connections were forged in the quiet heart of Kunur.